Welcome to BBC News, broadcasting to viewers in North America and around the globe. My name is Nkem Ifejika, and these are our top stories. Heading home, Russian diplomats begin leaving Washington in the latest tit-for-tat expulsions over the nerve agent poisoning of a former spy in Britain. Sorrow and anger in Gaza. Palestinians mourn the protesters killed in clashes with Israeli troops. Hundreds pay their respects at the funeral of the world-renowned physicist, Professor Stephen Hawking. Hello and welcome to the program. Dozens of the Russian United States have left Washington. On Monday, they were given 7 days to leave the country in what has become a tit-for-tat diplomatic row. Chris Buckler reports from Washington.
Well, behind the gates of the Russian embassy in Washington, you got a real sense of defiance. You had diplomats and their families standing there, clapping, cheering and waving, and music was being played as some of their colleagues got on buses with their families and with their suitcases to leave America. They had, of course, been given 7 days to leave the US. 48 of the 60 officials that America had ordered out were based here in Washington. And of course that action was taken not just because of the poisoning of a former spy in England as well as his daughter, but also because of concerns about Russian power and influence being used in countries like Syria and also in the Ukraine. And indeed concerns about espionage and interference happening inside America's borders. There's a deep concern about the actions of what the White House call Russian spies here. But Russia denies all of that, and they of course have already responded by ordering 60 Americans out. I think the White House will be looking closely at what's happening with the UK and Russia at the moment, with Russia ordering yet more UK diplomats out of their country, because there is a concern and a sense that there is a danger of this escalating. Certainly, if you look at the deteriorating relationships, they do exist between America and Russia. And you get a sense, unless somebody says, OK, enough is enough, let's pause this for a second, there is a real chance that yet more diplomats and their families could be climbing on board yet more buses.
And that was Chris Buckler with the latest from Washington. Meanwhile, the Foreign Office in London says that it's considering a request from Russia to be given consular access to Yulia Skripal. Ms. Skripal is said to be conscious and talking in hospital after she and her father were poisoned with a nerve agent in the UK 4 weeks ago. Simon Jones reports from Salisbury, which is where the attack took place.
Well, given that the British authorities were so quick to point the finger at Russia in the wake of the attack here for being responsible, it might seem extraordinary that the British government is now considering a request from Russia to be granted access to Yulia Skripal in hospital. The key thing, I think, here, though, is going to be what Yulia Skripal herself wants. The big question, is she going to want any contact with the Russian authorities? And even if she did, is she likely to be well enough anytime soon for that to happen? Now, the Russian authorities say it is their right to have contact with her, and they've also listed 27 questions that they would like to ask the British government about the attack here and also about the treatment that she is receiving in hospital alongside her father. They want to know why the treatment she is getting seems to be having a greater effect than on her father, who remains in a critical condition. They've also even asked to see photos of Yulia and Sergei Skripal in hospital to prove that they are indeed here in Salisbury and that they are indeed alive. Well, there hasn't been a response to that from the Foreign Office, but what they say is they will consider Russia's request under international law, but they're stressing Yulia Skripal's rights will be the #1 priority. We've also learned today further details about about expulsions of British diplomats from Moscow. We already knew that 23 had been kicked out of the country. Yesterday we were told there were going to be even more who were going to have to leave. Now we've learned it's likely to be an extra 27 or so diplomats or possibly administrative workers who are going to have to leave Moscow once again. Now, what we're not sure is whether the British government are going to take any direct action following that. They say they're aware of what's happened, they're monitoring the situation, but they say it's regrettable, but it was to be expected.
Simon Jones in Salisbury. Let's have a look at some of the other stories making the news. Reports from Syria say a deal has been reached to evacuate critically injured people from the last rebel-held town in eastern Ghouta, which is Douma. The agreement follows negotiations involving rebels in Russia. Syrian army officials said the whole of eastern Ghouta, with the exception of Douma, was now under its control. President Trump has accused the online retailer Amazon of not paying enough tax. On Twitter, he said the U.S. Postal Service was losing money on every parcel it delivered for the company. Mr. Trump has become increasingly critical of Amazon since its founder, Jeff Bezos, bought the Washington Post newspaper. Now, thousands of Palestinians have attended funerals in Gaza for the people shot by Israeli troops during clashes on the territory's border with Israel on Friday. The Palestinians say that they were unarmed protesters. The Israelis say that they faced a mass attempt to break down their border defenses and to send in terrorists. Our Middle East correspondent Yolande Nell reports from Jerusalem.
This was a day of mourning. Thousands turning out for funerals in Gaza. Distraught relatives and defiant militants. Yesterday, Palestinians said they planned a peaceful march on the Israel-Gaza border. But Israel's military says demonstrators threw stones and tried to breach the perimeter fence. That's when its soldiers opened fire. And the result was deadly. At least 15 killed and hundreds wounded. Palestinians here are demanding the right to return to land they lost 70 years ago when the State of Israel was created. They say they won't give up, although Israel has long rejected their claim.
They say that the old will die and the young will forget, but yesterday there were young people, children, women and men at the borders, showing the occupier that they will not forget. This is their land. We will not forget, nor will we surrender.
The UN is calling for an investigation, but Israeli officials blame Gaza's leaders for stirring up unrest.
Of course they're allowed to protest, but this wasn't a protest. This was an attempt of potentially thousands of people to cross over into Israel. Any state in the world would have taken measures to stop people from infiltrating into its territory.
For the next 6 weeks, Palestinians say they'll stay in these camps near the Israeli border. And the fear is that further mass protests here will lead to further violence. Yolande Nell, BBC News, Jerusalem.
The funeral of the physicist Professor Stephen Hawking has been held in Cambridge. Hundreds of people lined the streets near the church, close to the college where he was an academic for more than 50 years. Joe Black was there.
He was one of the greatest scientists of modern times, an international icon. But home was Cambridge, the city and the university. The bell of Great St Mary's tolled 76 times, once for each year he lived. Outside in the drizzle and rain, thousands came to say goodbye to the man with the magnificent mind.
Professor Hawking was such an inspiring person, and it's a very sad day.
History is being made today because Stephen Hawking is going to be interred in Westminster Abbey next to St Isaac Newton.
Because he's a scientific genius and he's discovered a lot of things, and it's just showing appreciation.
People stood quietly, respectfully, breaking into spontaneous applause as Professor Hawking's coffin was carried in and out of the church. His family stood solemnly but proud. His first wife, Jane Hellier-Jones, waved as the hearse pulled away.
The service was very heartfelt. We heard remembrances about his work as well as his family. how he was as a man and how he was as a physicist and how he was as a wonderful human being.
Also among the 500 mourners, Eddie Redmayne, who played the professor in the film The Theory of Everything, comedian and science presenter Dara O'Brien, and astrophysicist and musician Brian May. This was a private service for Professor Hawking's family, friends and colleagues.
Joe Black on the funeral of Professor Stephen Hawking. Now, the Nobel Peace Laureate Malala Yousafzai has visited her hometown in Pakistan's Swat Valley for the first time since he was shot there by Islamist militants 6 years ago. Ms. Yousafzai, who's now a student at Oxford University, was attacked on a school bus and left for dead because she was campaigning for the education of girls. It's 3:10 in the morning. Stay with us here on BBC News because still to come, it has been the Battle of the Heavyweights. What happened when two world champions met in one of boxing's biggest nights of the year. Families of Western hostages who were killed by the Islamic State group have condemned comments by two British men accused of involvement. Alexander Kote and El Shafi El Sheikh, who are being held by Kurdish fighters in Syria, have claimed that they won't get a fair trial because they say they've been stripped of their UK citizenship. Duncan Kennedy has the report.
The two men were picked up by Kurdish forces in northern Syria in January and had been part of a sadistic gang of British IS fighters that tortured and beheaded dozens of hostages. 4 of them stood out for their brutality. Mohammed Enwazi, known as Jihadi John, now dead, Ain Davis, now in jail, and the newly captured pair, Alexander Kote and El Shafi El Sheikh. They're accused of at least 27 beheadings, including Alan Henning, an aid driver from Eccles, and David Haynes, a former RAF engineer from Perth. Now, in comments which have outraged their victims' families, Kote and El Sheikh have called the murders of their hostages regrettable. They also say the UK has illegally withdrawn their citizenship. One of their victims was the American journalist James Foley here in the Helmet. His mother says she's worried the men could escape if there's a delay in dealing with them.
If somebody doesn't take the leadership and take them to trial, I fear they'll get away or something else. I am concerned that the international community and our government, the US government and UK, need to work together to hold them accountable.
But that raises the question of where the two men should be held accountable. The Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, hasn't confirmed that they've both been stripped of their British citizenship. What is known is that the UK has been speaking to the Americans about them, and that the last thing Britain wants is to have them back here to stand trial. A view endorsed by the government's legal and political supporters.
I'm sure it would be desirable that individuals against whom there are serious allegations should be brought to trial. But that's not to say that the Home Secretary is wrong in her view, that they should be deprived of British citizenship, which I understand she's done, although it hasn't been confirmed, and therefore has no desire to bring them into this country to try them.
But others say, as the men spent most of their lives in Britain, it's British justice they should face.
We have a duty, I think, to try them fairly, as we will, and to punish them heavily, and to show the world just how British justice works.
El Sheikh and Kote stand accused of the most barbaric of crimes. Where and when they answer for them is now the subject of intense international debate. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News.
The Ministry of Defence has released the name of the British soldier who was killed on Thursday in Syria while fighting Islamic State militants. 33-year-old Sergeant Matt Tonro was from the Parachutes Regiment. His commanding officer paid tribute to him, saying that he was a caring and considerate soul, a loving and dutiful son, and a friend to many. Teachers have moved closer to allowing rolling strike action if they don't receive an above-inflation and across-the-board pay increase next year. Now, if ballots for industrial action go ahead, it could mean disruption in schools in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Our education editor, Branwen Jeffries, reports.
I've asked you to stop your experiments because we're kind of running out of the solutions. Teachers say they're running out of patience. Their pay has fallen further than nurses or police officers. Many argue their workload is unbearable. Some are leaving as a result. Today, those feelings spilled out in the debate.
Young teachers are leaving in droves. Who wants to spend years studying to enter a profession and then not be paid enough to own or rent a decent home?
Our teachers are fed up of low pay, the erosion of our national pay structure, and watching good teachers leave the profession. They deserve better, and most importantly, they want to do something about it.
Can I see all those in favour?
That's something a vote to consider a strike ballot. Teachers here are fired up about their workload and their pay. But the government has made it harder for public sector workers to go on strike. So there'll be months of consultation first. And in the meantime, there could be a pay offer.
I do think teachers looking at the NHS settlement will now be expecting that the pay offer will be at least the level that the NHS workers have got.
The government will have to weigh up its priorities, the cost of a pay rise against the growing difficulties of recruiting teachers. Bronwyn Jeffries, BBC News, Brighton.
A Labour Party official at the centre of a dispute about anti-Semitism has stepped down from the party's ruling body. Christine Shawcroft had been under pressure to leave Labour's National Executive Committee after opposing the suspension of a council candidate accused of Holocaust denial. In a statement, she said that she was completely opposed to anti-Semitism and supported Jeremy Corbyn's efforts to tackle it. She'll be replaced on the NEC by the comedian Eddie Izzard. This is BBC News, and these are the latest headlines. Dozens of Russian diplomats begin leaving Washington in the latest tit-for-tat expulsions over the nerve agent poisoning of a former spy in Britain. Palestinians observe a day of national mourning for the people killed in clashes with Israeli soldiers at the Gaza border. Now, the British boxer Anthony Joshua has beaten New Zealand's Joseph Parker by a unanimous points decision in a world heavyweight title unification bout in Cardiff. Joshua had won his previous 20 fights by knockout. He is now one belt away from becoming undisputed world champion. Now, James Gray is a freelance sports reporter. He joins me now from Cardiff. Thanks a lot for joining us, James. First things first, was the match to your expectation?
Yeah, I think it was. It was when you get two champions in the ring together, there's too much for each man to lose, and I think that proved in the way that they fought the fight. I thought Joshua would emerge victorious. He's probably the stronger and bigger man. It's the first time that he'd been taken all the way to 12 rounds, so that was maybe a surprise, but I think given the nature of the occasion, that was probably as we expected.
I've seen some comments of people who watched the match talking about Joshua being more tactical than people have seen of him in the past.
Yeah, it was definitely a learning fight for him. You know, in boxing terms, he's still relatively inexperienced. He's only 28. He's only got now 21 fights under his belt, and he didn't box until he was 17 at all as an amateur. So he is still learning a lot of things. Parker's a very true boxer. He's not a fighter. So that was a challenge for Josh, who's come into fights before and just being able to use that incredible physicality that he has to just unlock on people. So yeah, he did have to be more tactical, but he proved that he can do that, and that's a huge step forward. Even the opposition corner was saying afterwards in the press conference that they were impressed by some of the things that he could do that they didn't think he could before. So as good as we might have thought Joshua was before, he appears to be getting better every day.
So he's got, what, I think 3-4 belts now?
So he's now, we talk about the 4 major heavyweight belts, and he's now got 3 of them, and it leaves just one, the WBC, which is held by Deontay Wilder, the American.
And from what I've seen on Twitter, it's expected that that will be a fight to watch and remember. Yeah,
I mean, Wilder he's one of the few guys in the world with a similar stature to Joshua. He's 6'7", I think, off the top of my head. He's got 40 wins as opposed to Joshua's 21.
And I think we just lost it. sadly. Something else which people talked about was people have been talking a lot about the referee, complaining that the referee separated them too often. People even saying that, oh, my teacher let us fight for longer than that. Now, as it's Easter, Pope Francis has led the traditional Easter Vigil Mass at St. Peter's Basilica, attended by around 10,000 pilgrims. During the service, the Pope baptized 8 people. In his homily, the Pontiff urged believers to renew their lives. On Sunday morning, he's due to deliver his traditional Easter message from the balcony of the Basilica. Now, China's defunct space station is hurtling back to Earth, and experts say that it's on course to crash in the next day or so. China lost control of the Tiangong-1 spacecraft after it was decommissioned in 2013. The 9-ton station should have had a controlled re-entry, but after a technical glitch, it's been spinning out of control ever since. Now, earlier I spoke to Dr. Jonathan McDowell. He's an astronomer at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Boston, and I asked him why the crash date had been shifted.
A few days ago, we thought it might be Saturday, Sunday. Now it's looking more like Sunday, Monday. The window starts maybe in 12 hours from now, so we're following the orbit very closely.
So what happened? Because that's different to the prediction that we had before.
Right, and it's just weather forecasting, right, is really hard. And we're forecasting the density of the upper atmosphere of the Earth. And when the sun burps and sends radiation and plasma towards the Earth, that changes the density of the atmosphere, changes the headwind, and so the Tiangong-1 spacecraft is going around the Earth at 17,000 miles an hour. It feels a very thin headwind from the outer atmosphere, and as that gets denser and less dense, the rate that Tiangong spirals in speeds up or slows down. And so we just overestimated how much the slowing would be, gave it a few extra hours of life. So we'll see. Things could still change in the next few hours, but we're pretty confident now that it'll come down sometime late on the 1st, early on the 2nd.
Okay. Do we know where it might fall?
That's the problem. The orbit of the spacecraft goes from 43 degrees north to 43 degrees south. Every 90 minutes it goes around the Earth at 17,000 miles an hour. So if you're off by an hour in when it comes down, you're 17,000 miles wrong in your prediction. And right now, the latest window is about 3 hours either side, and so that's 4 times round the Earth. We don't know where it's going to come down. So I'm hoping that by sort of mid-tomorrow, we'll have a more accurate prediction that will get us down to a couple of hours either way, and we'll be able to start saying, all right, this continent is not going to be underneath, but this one is. But we're not going to get any better than that until after it's actually re-entered.
I'm almost tempted to say thanks for nothing, Dr. McDowell.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
But this is the most important question for me. Should I get a helmet?
Yeah, well, I do have from 1979 the Skylab helmet, complete with tinfoil, for you. It's only $10 on eBay, but no, really the chance of anyone being hurt is 1 in tens of thousands. The Earth is a big place, and most of it is pretty empty. So we really don't worry too much. Even if some debris does come down in a populated area, it'll be, this 7.5-ton station will mostly melt on the way down. It'll break up into different fireballs, which will come down and maybe, a few 100 pounds each. And they won't be crashing at 17,000 miles an hour. They'll only be crashing at 100 miles an hour. So it'll be like a light plane crash, but spread over a 100-mile strip. And so the damage won't be too much.
Dr. Jonathan McDowell with the facts there. Now, it's 40 years since the establishment of a unique peace community in Israel of Jews and Palestinians living and working together. It started with just 4 families and is now home to more than 60. It's called Neve Shalom, and 2 of its long-standing residents spoke to Witness about the life in this oasis of peace.
This is a remarkable picture. Tom and Feder are 2 10-year-olds who share a desk at school. They're friends. What's remarkable about it is that Feder is an Arab, Tom a Jew. They're the product of a place called Neve Shalom. It's Hebrew for oasis of peace.
The community was formed by 4 families, 1 Palestinian family and 3 Israeli Jewish families. We wanted to try to live in an alternative way, Jews and Palestinians together in equality in one piece of land. I'm Dr. Nava Sonnenschein. I'm an Israeli Jew, and I came to live in Wahat al-Salam, Neve Shalom, in 79.
I am Daoud Boulos. I'm a Palestinian Arab. I'm a resident of Wahat al-Salam, Neve Shalom.
It was a very small, tiny community with no trees, no running water, no connection to electricity, but we had big dreams.
Here we found hope, and we wanted to start a life with people who are enlightened, who are, accept us as we are. When we came, of course, there were some questions about, are you fooling yourself? Are you going to be in some kind of utopian society where it's not really realistic? And I said, maybe, but, we hope it's going to teach others that it's actually possible, because this is why we are here.
Although only 15 families live at Neve Shalom, 7,000 teenagers have passed through attending its peace workshops. Some had never met a member of the opposite community until they came here.
It's very powerful to see a moment of change. Really, people realize that what they thought before, it's not the reality. And we learned a lot. This is how we started the School for Peace.
The different, events that took place outside the village, like the Intifada, the war in Gaza, initiated a lot of talk and discussions and debates. My youngest daughter, for instance, her opinion on the issue of army service, for the Jewish Israelis, because here it's compulsory service. You can't say no, really. She said that, I expect all the people who come to be part of this community, part of this project here, Wahat al-Salam Neve Shalom, not to serve in the army. But I know this is something, these are easy words to say on our part. And I know it's extremely difficult for the other side.
Yeah, my 3 kids went to the army, but not to be combat soldiers, because they didn't want to fight, to be soldiers. Now, when I see the children playing together, laughing together, quarreling together, it feels good.
The majority of the kids that are studying here, they're not Wahat al-Salam Neve Shalom kids. They're from outside. Their parents want them to have our kind of education, this exposure to the other side in an early age. And it shows the effectiveness of this community.
It's a working model of almost 40 years that we are here, and it can work.
Residents of Neve Shalom in Israel speaking to the BBC Witness team. And you can get in touch with me and the rest of the team on Twitter. I'm at Nkem Ifejika. The time is, let's have a look, it's 3:27 in the morning. Coming up on BBC News, it's the weather with Stav Danaos.
Hello there. Saturday was a pretty disappointing